beaten for not bearing sons, until a cowboy showed her what real respect is. The sun rose over the small village like it did every morning, spilling a warm, golden light over the dusty roads and clay homes. But inside one small house on the edge of the village, the morning felt heavy. Amina, a young woman of barely 20, sat quietly on the woven mat in the corner of her home. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the simple breakfast for her husband, Murad, and his parents. Every movement felt calculated, careful, because she knew that one wrong step could bring anger, scolding, or worse. Amina had married Murad when she was just 17, filled with hope and dreams of love and happiness. She had imagined a life where she and Murad would laugh together, where they would share stories and comfort one another through hardships. But those dreams had faded quickly. Life in her husband's household was far from what she had imagined. Murad was not cruel all the time, but his patience ran thin quickly, and the older women in the house, Murad's mother and aunt, were sharp-tongued and never hesitant to remind Amina of her failures. The first whispers had begun soon after their marriage. "You must give us a son," Murad's mother had said, her voice cold and sharp. "A daughter is not enough."
A woman who cannot bear sons is not a woman at all.
At first, Amina had smiled politely, trying to hide the hurt in her chest.
She had been so young, so naive, and she had believed that love and patience would win over harsh words. But as the days turned into months, and then years, those words turned into actions. Harsh words became slaps, and slaps sometimes became stronger blows. Amina had tried to understand. She had tried everything she could think of. She had read old remedies from the village women, prayed in the quiet of the night, and even fasted to show her dedication. But nothing seemed to work. Each month brought disappointment, and each disappointment brought another round of blame. "It's your fault," Murad's mother would say, her eyes narrowing in accusation. "Disk, you are lazy. You are weak. You will never give this family a son." Even Murad, the man she had once thought she loved, had started to distance himself. He did not raise his hand often, but his silence was heavier than any strike. He would sit across the room, his face cold, his eyes avoiding hers. When he did speak, it was usually to scold her, sometimes for failing to cook properly, sometimes for not cleaning the house fast enough, sometimes for simply existing without producing the child they demanded. Amina learned to lower her voice, to make herself invisible in her own home. The other women in the village seemed to notice her struggles, breath. Some pitied her quietly, avoiding her eyes when she walked past. Others whispered behind her back, saying she was cursed or that she had bad luck. The weight of judgment pressed down on Amina, and she began to feel that the walls around her were closing in. She sometimes wondered if her life would always be this way, trapped by traditions and expectations that she had never chosen for herself. Despite the cruelty, Amina had moments when she remembered who she truly was. She loved the mornings when she could step outside before anyone woke, feel the cool wind on her face, and listen to the birds singing in the trees. She liked to watch the river that ran near the village, its water sparkling in the sunlight. In those moments, she felt a small flicker of hope, a reminder that there was still beauty in the world. But even those moments were fleeting, because the reality of her life returned quickly, relentless and unyielding. One particular morning, the tension in the house was worse than usual. Murad had returned late from the fields, his face flushed with anger. Amina had prepared his meal as usual, placing the food carefully on the small table. But as he sat down, his eyes fell on her hands. "Why are your hands so rough?" he demanded. "Do you even care about this house? Do you care about me?" Amina's heart pounded, and she swallowed the fear that rose in her throat. "I did my best," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I woke early and prepared everything you asked." Murad's mother, who had been watching silently from the doorway, let out a sharp laugh. "Your best is never enough," she said. Amina, you bring nothing but shame. You have failed this family again. Amina felt a familiar sting in her eyes, but she refused to cry. Tears had never helped her. They had only brought more scolding, more anger. Instead, she nodded silently, bowed her head, and cleaned the dishes with trembling hands. But she knew better than to argue. In this house, arguing meant more punishment, and she had learned to survive by staying quiet, by keeping her presence as small and invisible as possible. Days passed in a cycle of chores, fear, and small moments of secret longing for freedom. Amina found solace in small things. The sound of the wind through the trees, the laughter of children playing outside, the simple joy of finding a flower blooming along the path. Breaths of life, because they reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of feeling hope. One evening, as she sat by the window after finishing her chores, she noticed a group of women gathered near the village square. Curious. She inched closer, careful not to be seen. They were talking about a traveling fair that would come to the nearby town in a few days. "It will be something different," one woman said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "They have horses, shows, and music. People from everywhere come to watch." Amina felt her heart stir with something she hadn't felt in a long time: curiosity. She imagined stepping into a place where no one knew her, where no one judged her for her failures or blamed her for what she could not control. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream of being seen as more than a failure, as more than a young woman trapped in a life she hadn't chosen. That night, Amina lay on her thin mat, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the fair. Rest. She imagined the horses, the performers, the laughter, and the music. She imagined herself walking among people who smiled at her without judgment, who treated her with kindness just for being human. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it carried her into dreams filled with light and freedom. The days until the fair were long and filled with tension. Murad grew angrier, and his mother's words became sharper. But Amina held on to her secret hope. She planned quietly how she might see the fair, even if just for a few hours. Every glance at the horizon reminded her that there was something beyond her village, beyond her chores, beyond the pain. Finally, the day arrived. The village was buzzing with excitement as people talked about the fair. Amina watched from the shadows, her heart racing. She knew she could not go openly, but she also knew she could not let fear stop her. With a small bag of provisions, she slipped quietly from the house, her steps careful but determined. Each step felt like a small rebellion, a claim to her own life, her own choices, however temporary they might be. As she reached the edge of the village and saw the bright colors of the fair in the distance, Amina's heart swelled. For the first time in years, she felt the possibility of joy, of wonder, of being more than what others demanded she be. She felt a flicker of courage in her chest, a spark that had been hidden beneath years of fear and scolding. But she did not yet know what the future would hold, but she knew that she had taken the first step toward finding herself again. The fair awaited, full of life, color, and music, and Amina stepped forward with quiet hope. It was the beginning of something she could not yet name, a journey toward freedom, respect, and the life she had always dreamed she might have. The fair was unlike anything Amina had ever seen. As she approached, she could hear the laughter of children and the soft music of flutes and drums drifting through the warm air. Brightly painted tents stretched across the open field, and horses pranced proudly, their riders guiding them with skill and grace. People moved from one stall to another, tasting sweet treats, buying small trinkets, and cheering for performers who danced and sang. Amina's heart raced as she took her first steps inside. For a moment, she felt like she had entered a different world, one where the harshness of her daily life could not touch her. Colors, sounds, and smells surrounded her, each one a small delight she hadn't realized she had missed. Browned. She wandered slowly, careful not to draw attention to herself, her eyes wide with wonder at the magic around her.
Near the center of the fair, a crowd had gathered.
A group of cowboys was performing, guiding their horses through jumps and tricks with elegance and precision. One man in particular caught Amina's attention. He moved with confidence and calm, speaking gently to the horses and smiling at the crowd. There was something about him that seemed different, something kind and steady that drew her in without her even realizing it. As she watched, the cowboy noticed her standing at the edge of the crowd. He gave her a small nod, a warm smile that felt unusual and comforting. Beret. Amina's face flushed, and she quickly looked away, pretending to examine a nearby stall, but she could not stop glancing back, curious about the man who had smiled at her without judgment or expectation.
Over the next few days, Amina returned to the fair in secret, each visit bringing her a small sense of freedom she had never experienced before.
But she would arrive early, watch the performers practice, and quietly observe the laughter, the respect, and the joy that seemed to flow through the fair. The cowboy, whose name she later learned was Luke, always acknowledged her presence with a gentle nod or a kind smile. He never spoke to her in a way that felt demanding or harsh, and that alone made Amina feel something she had long forgotten, that she could matter, even just a little, without having to prove herself or meet impossible expectations. One evening, as the sun began to set and the fair's lanterns glowed softly against the darkening sky, Luke approached her. "You seem to enjoy the show," he said, his voice calm and friendly. "I've noticed you watching for a few days." Amina's heart skipped a beat. She had never spoken to a man like this before, a stranger who looked at her without suspicion or blame. She nodded quietly, unsure how to respond. "You don't have to hide here," Luke said gently. "Bration, you can watch, enjoy, and be yourself. No one will bother you." His words felt strange and wonderful. No one had ever told her she could just exist without being criticized or judged. Slowly, she found the courage to smile. "Thank you," she whispered, almost afraid that saying more would shatter the fragile peace she felt in his presence. Over the next week, Amina and Luke spoke more. He taught her small things about horses, how to care for them, how to understand their moods, and how to build trust with them. He never forced her, never rushed her, and always spoke with patience.
For the first time in her life, Amina felt respected.
She felt seen as someone who could learn, who could grow, and who deserved kindness simply for being human. Through their conversations, Amina began to understand something she had never truly allowed herself to feel. That her value was not tied to the ability to bear sons or to please others. She had spent years blaming herself for things beyond her control, but Luke's gentle guidance helped her see that her life had meaning beyond what her husband or his family demanded. One afternoon, as they walked through the fairgrounds, Luke asked, "Do you like the idea of trying something new? Something that scares you a little?" Amina hesitated. She had spent so much of her life avoiding risk, avoiding attention, avoiding anything that could bring criticism. But there was something in Luke's eyes that made her trust him. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. "There's a small riding lesson I can give you," he said.
Just for fun. You don't have to be perfect.
"You just have to try." Amina's heart raced at the idea. She had never ridden a horse before. The thought of falling or making a mistake made her nervous, but she also felt a spark of excitement, a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. Slowly, she nodded.
"Okay," she said, her voice trembling slightly.
Luke guided her to a gentle, calm horse named Star. He showed her how to approach it, how to hold the reins, and how to sit safely. At first, Amina was tense, afraid that any wrong move would lead to disaster. But Luke's patient voice reassured her, and soon she found herself relaxing, learning to move with the horse rather than against it. The moment she rode Star through a small open space, Amina felt something shift inside her. She laughed freely, a sound she had almost forgotten she could make, and the wind on her face felt like freedom itself. Bye. Luke watched with a gentle smile, never imposing, never taking over. He simply allowed her to discover her own courage, her own strength. That night, as Amina lay on her mat back in her house, she thought about what had happened. For the first time, she realized that life could be different. She did not have to live only for others' approval. She did not have to accept cruelty as her fate. She had discovered that there was a world where kindness, patience, and respect existed, and she could be part of it. But even with this new hope, Amina knew her life at home had not changed. Murad's anger still waited, and his mother's scolding still pierced her like sharp knives. She could not stay at the fair forever. Yet, something inside her had shifted. She had found a spark of strength, a sense of dignity, and the courage to imagine a life beyond fear. The next day she returned to the fair again, determined to learn more, to watch, to listen, and to feel that sense of freedom. Luke showed her more skills, small tasks with the horses and simple tricks that required patience and trust. Each success, each small achievement, made her feel stronger, as though she were rediscovering pieces of herself that had been buried under years of pain. Some word of Amina's frequent visits began to reach some villagers, though they did not know the full story. Some whispered that she had become attached to the fair, that she was spending too much time away from her home. But Amina did not care. She had discovered a place where she could breathe, where she could learn, and where she could be treated with respect, a rare gift in her life. As the fair continued, Luke and Amina grew closer, though always within the boundaries of respect. He never forced anything, never demanded loyalty or affection. He simply treated her as a person of worth, someone capable of learning, growing, and finding her own path. And that simple respect, something Amina had never known, became a lifeline. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the fair glowed under the lanterns, Amina realized that her life was no longer only defined by her failures or by the harsh words of others. She had discovered that she could be brave, that she could find joy even in small moments, and that she could begin to imagine a future where she was not bound by fear. She did not yet know how she would escape the constraints of her home, how she would reclaim her life entirely, but she had taken the first steps. She had learned to trust herself, to find courage in small victories, and to recognize that respect and kindness were not luxuries. They were rights every person deserved. And as she watched Luke guide the horses through another practice, she felt a warmth in her chest. This was only the beginning, she knew. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and fear. But for the first time, she believed that she had the strength to face it. She had found a world beyond cruelty, a place where respect mattered, and a person who reminded her that she deserved to be treated with dignity. For Amina, the fair was no longer just a place of entertainment. It was a symbol of possibility, of courage, and of hope. And she knew that one day she would carry that lesson with her beyond the gates of the fair, beyond the limits of her home, and into a life where she could finally stand tall, free from fear, and proud of who she was. Amina's visits to the fair became the highlight of her days. Each morning she woke with a sense of anticipation, her heart light with the thought of stepping into a world so different from her home. The fair was alive with laughter, music, and movement. But more importantly, it was alive with respect. Everyone, performers, visitors, and animals alike, moved together in harmony, without fear, without judgment. Luke became her guide in this world. He never forced her to do anything she wasn't ready for, yet he gently encouraged her to try, to learn, and to grow. He taught her not only about horses and performance, but also about the importance of patience, trust, and self-belief. You have to respect yourself first. he said one afternoon as she practiced a small trick with Star, the gentle horse. Only then can you earn respect from others. She had never been told that her worth mattered beyond her ability to bear sons or serve her husband. For years she had lived in fear of anger, punishment, and disappointment. Perfect. And yet, here was a man who treated her as an equal, someone whose kindness was simple, unwavering, and unconditional. The more time she spent with Luke, the more she began to notice the changes within herself. She stood taller, walked with more confidence, and even spoke more firmly when addressing small tasks at home. Though Murad and his family remained harsh and critical, Amina discovered that their words no longer had the same power over her. Each smile, each lesson from Luke built her inner strength. One day, while helping Luke guide a group of young riders, Amina made a mistake. She lost her grip on the reins, and the horse, startled, took a few quick steps before calming down. Amina's heart pounded with fear, and for a moment she expected harsh criticism. But Luke merely placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "It's okay. Mistakes happen."
What matters is that you keep trying. That simple response shocked her.
In her home, mistakes were met with anger, scolding, or even punishment. But here, mistakes were simply part of learning. For the first time, Amina realized that she could grow without fear of being crushed. She could try, fail, and try again. And with that realization came a small, thrilling sense of freedom. As the days passed, Amina found herself speaking more openly with Luke. She shared small pieces of her life, speaking quietly of the struggles she faced at home. But she told him about the fear she carried, the physical and emotional pain she had endured, and the ways she had been blamed for things beyond her control. Luke listened without judgment, offering only kindness and understanding. "You are stronger than you know," he said one evening as they walked through the fairground under the glow of lanterns. "You have endured more than anyone should have to, and yet you are still here, still learning, still growing."
That takes courage. Amina felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her this way before.
No one had ever recognized her strength, her perseverance, or her courage. She had spent years feeling small, insignificant, and unworthy. And yet, in Luke's presence, she began to see herself differently. Her visits to the fair became more than an escape. They became lessons in living. Despair. Luke taught her how to feed and groom the horses, how to guide them gently but confidently, and how to trust both the animals and herself. With each small success, Amina's confidence grew. She discovered that she could take control of small situations, make decisions, and see the results of her choices.
One afternoon, as the sun bathed the fair in golden light, Luke asked Amina if she wanted to try riding without his support.
Her heart leapt with a mix of fear and excitement. She had grown confident with Star under her careful guidance, but the thought of doing it alone made her pulse quicken. "Bert, I don't know if I can," she whispered, her hands trembling. "You can," Luke said firmly but gently. "I believe in you, and even if you stumble, I will be right here to help." "But you have to trust yourself." Amina took a deep breath and mounted the horse alone. Her body was tense at first, but as she began to move, she felt a rhythm she had never noticed before. The horse responded to her touch, to her voice, and she felt a surge of pride.
She was doing it. She was riding on her own, guiding a powerful animal with skill and confidence.
When she dismounted, her hands were sore and her heart was racing, but she was smiling like she had not smiled in years. Luke clapped gently. "See! You are stronger than you think."
He glances around in desperation. That evening, as she walked home through the quiet village streets, Amina felt a strange mix of fear and hope.
She knew that her life at home had not changed. Murad and his family remained the same, harsh and demanding. But something within her had shifted. She had discovered her own strength, her own courage, and her own ability to claim respect, even if only in small moments.
Over the next few weeks, Amina began to notice other changes as well. She no longer flinched at every sharp word or raised voice.
She began to speak more firmly when asked to complete chores, asserting herself in small ways. She even started helping other women in the village quietly, sharing tips on managing their homes or speaking gently to those who seemed fearful. Each small act of confidence was a victory, and each victory strengthened her sense of self. Luke continued to guide her, teaching lessons that went beyond horses and performance. He spoke about fairness, patience, and empathy. He showed her how respect was earned, not through fear, but through understanding, care, and clear boundaries. Amina listened intently, absorbing these lessons as though they were lifelines thrown to someone lost at sea.
One evening, as they sat together near the horses after a long day, Amina spoke quietly.
"I don't know if I could ever leave," she admitted, tears brimming.
"The world outside my home seems so big."
"And I feel so small."
"It is big, and at first it can feel overwhelming. But you are not as small as you think."
"You have already survived so much. You have already shown courage every day, even when it felt impossible. And you will continue to show it." His words settled into her heart like seeds in fertile soil. For the first time, Amina allowed herself to imagine a life beyond fear.
She began to picture leaving the harsh environment she had endured, building a life on her own terms, and finding people who treated her with kindness and dignity.
But even with this hope, Amina faced inner conflict. Fear was still strong. Fear of gossip, fear of losing what little security she had, fear of facing the unknown. Yet, with each visit to the fair, with each lesson from Luke, the fear became quieter, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. One day, Luke introduced a new challenge, a small performance with the other riders. Amina's hands shook as she prepared, but Luke's calm presence steadied her.
"Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about trying and showing courage," he said.
When the performance began, Amina felt her heart race. The audience watched, the horses moved gracefully, and Amina guided her horse with a steady hand. For the first time, she felt pride, not the forced pride of meeting someone else's expectations, but true pride in what she had achieved through her own effort. The applause at the end of the performance was small, but it meant the world to Amina. She felt recognized, valued, and capable. She realized that respect could be given and earned without fear or violence. She understood that her life could be different if she chose it to be. That night, as she walked home through the village, she felt a quiet resolve forming within her. She did not yet know exactly how she would change her life, but she knew that she could. The lessons from Luke and the fair had planted a seed of courage, a determination to seek respect, and a belief in her own worth. Amina knew the road ahead would not be easy. She would have to face fear, judgment, and uncertainty. But she had discovered a truth that could not be taken away. She was strong. She was brave, and she deserved respect. And for the first time in her life, she believed that she could claim it for herself. The fair had become more than a place of escape. It had become a classroom for courage, a sanctuary for hope, and a window to a life she could choose. And as Amina looked at Luke guiding the horses under the soft glow of the lanterns, she realized that she had already begun her journey toward freedom, toward self-respect, and toward a future where she could finally be seen for who she truly was. Amina woke that morning with a strange mix of fear and excitement. The sun had barely risen, but she felt awake in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her heart was pounding, not with dread, but with a growing sense of purpose. She knew that today could be the day she finally took the first real step toward freedom. Yes. For years, she had lived in fear of Murad and his mother, their sharp words and harsh punishments always looming over her. She had hidden in the shadows, obeying, surviving, and waiting for moments of quiet. But now, after months at the fair, after lessons with Luke, after small victories and growing confidence, Amina felt ready to face the world on her own terms. She had spent the past weeks planning quiet preparation. She knew she could not run without preparation, and she could not leave without having some support. Luke had given her guidance, not by telling her what to do, but by helping her see her own strength, her own options. He had reminded her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward in spite of it. That morning, Amina gathered her few belongings, clothes she could carry, a small bundle of food, and the little money she had saved from helping neighbors with chores. But each item felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because it symbolized the life she was about to leave behind. She glanced at the small room she had known all her life, the walls that had witnessed her fear, her pain, and her silence. She took a deep breath and stepped outside, her eyes scanning the village one last time. She moved quickly, quietly, toward the edge of the village where the road led to the fairground. Each step felt like a small victory. She remembered Luke's words, "You have endured more than anyone should." Bus, you are stronger than you know. The thought of those words gave her courage. The first time she felt in control of her own life. The fairground was already alive with activity. Horses neighed, performers laughed, and children ran past with excitement. Amina's heart lifted as she saw Luke waiting for her near Star, the gentle horse she had learned to ride. He greeted her with a smile, one that spoke more than words ever could. There was no judgment, no expectation, only warmth and support. "You're ready," Luke said softly. "I can see it in your eyes." Amina nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I hope so," she whispered. Luke guided her through the fair, helping her plan her next steps. He showed her how to reach safe areas beyond the village where she could rest, and he introduced her to some people who could offer support without asking questions or judging. Each connection, each piece of advice gave Amina a sense of security she had never known. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Amina felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. She was leaving behind everything familiar, even if familiar had often meant fear and pain. But in its place, she carried hope, courage, and the knowledge that she could survive and thrive. She had learned to trust herself, to make decisions, and to take action. And that knowledge felt more powerful than any chains that had bound her. When she reached a quiet path leading out of the village, she paused to take a deep breath. The road ahead was unknown, but it was hers to choose. For the first time, she felt a sense of freedom that was not stolen, not borrowed, but earned. She mounted Star, feeling the horse respond to her touch and guidance. It was a small but profound victory proof that she could lead, guide, and move forward. As she rode, she thought about everything she had endured. The years of blame, the harsh words, the physical pain, the isolation, each memory was heavy, but now it was paired with strength. She had survived. Best. She had learned. She had grown. Breaths. And now she had the chance to live a life of her own making. The journey was not easy. The road was dusty and long, and Amina's body ached from days of travel. But she pressed on, determined to reach safety and build a new life. Along the way, she met others who had faced hardship, people who offered food, guidance, and encouragement. Each act of kindness reminded her that not everyone in the world judged or hurt others. Some people chose compassion and respect, and she could find her place among them. By evening, she reached a small town where she could rest and plan her next steps. Luke helped her find a modest room for the night, and together they discussed her options. She could start work, meet people who would support her independence, and begin building a life far from fear. For the first time, she felt that her future was not dictated by others' expectations but by her own choices. As she settled into the small room, Amina reflected on her journey. She had gone from a life of fear and oppression to a life of hope and courage. She had learned that respect was not given lightly, but it could be claimed through self-belief and determination. She had discovered that strength was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it and move forward anyway. Over the next weeks, Amina began to rebuild her life. She found work helping in small businesses, learned new skills, and made friends who treated her with kindness and dignity. She became known for her quiet strength and reliability, and for the first time she felt valued for who she was, not for what she could produce or how she fit someone else's expectations. Her confidence grew, and she started to dream bigger. She thought about the other women in her village, those still trapped by fear and harsh traditions. She realized that her journey could inspire others. Slowly, she began writing letters and sending messages through trusted friends, sharing her story and offering advice on courage, self-respect, and survival.
Months passed, and Amina flourished.
She visited the fair again, not as a visitor afraid of judgment, but as a participant who had learned courage, skill, and dignity. She rode confidently, guided horses, and even helped new riders learn the lessons she had once struggled to master.
Each day brought new challenges, but Amina faced them with a sense of empowerment she had never known in her old life. Luke remained a steady presence, never controlling, always supporting.
His friendship and guidance had taught her more than she could have imagined, about courage, respect, and the possibility of a life worth living. But Amina also discovered that the true power came from within her. Luke had shown her the path, but she had walked it herself. One bright morning, as the fair opened and performers prepared for the day, Amina looked around and smiled. The once intimidating world had become a place of possibility, learning, and joy. She thought about the girl she had been, scared and silenced, and felt pride in the woman she had become, strong, courageous, and full of hope. Amina knew that challenges would always exist, but she also knew that fear no longer ruled her. She had claimed her right to respect, her right to choose, and her right to live fully. The life she had dreamed of was no longer a dream. It was real, built step by step, choice by choice, and strengthened by every hardship she had endured. As she guided Star through the practice course, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. The lessons of the past had shaped her, but they did not define her. She had created her own path, one where courage, kindness, and self-respect led the way. And in that moment, Amina understood the greatest truth she had ever learned, that no one could take away the dignity she had claimed for herself, and no one could define her worth but her own heart. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden light over the fairground, and Amina felt a quiet joy. She had survived the pain, endured the fear, and learned to trust herself. She had discovered courage and claimed respect, and most importantly, she had learned that even in the darkest times, there was always a path to freedom, hope, and a life of dignity. With a calm smile, she mounted Star once more and rode through the fairground, her heart light, her spirit strong, and her future wide open. The journey had been long, but Amina had proven to herself that she was capable of anything. And as she looked at the horizon, she knew that her story was not just about survival. It was about transformation, courage, and the unshakable strength of a woman who refused to be defined by fear.